You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Bitcoin, Ether, Solana, Doge, and more. Cryptocurrencies and digital assets are taking the financial world by storm. This exploding market provides everything a savvy trader needs: volatility, volume, and liquidity, provided you know how to find it. That's where we come in. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown. Each week, we'll break down the latest trading activity, trends, and developments throughout the world's leading crypto derivatives markets. If it's moving the crypto markets, then you'll find it on the Crypto Rundown. The Crypto Rundown is brought to you by Amberdata. If you're entering the digital asset class, you'll need access to granular on-chain and market data from multiple venues to power research, trading, risk management, and compliance. Amberdata delivers comprehensive data and insights into blockchain networks, crypto markets, and decentralized finance, empowering financial institutions to apply traditional finance methods to digital assets. Amberdata eliminates the infrastructure setup, integration challenges, and maintenance headaches to access digital asset data, reducing cost and time to market to enter the digital asset class. Learn more and download their digital asset data guide at www.amberdata.io. Now it's time to dive into the exploding world of crypto derivatives. It's time for the Crypto Rundown.
All right, everybody. That music means we are back once again. It is Monday. It is post-option block. It means it's time once again to roll out a little bit of the old crypto rundown, see what's exploding, in some cases quite literally out there in the world of all things crypto. My name, of course, Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, as well as from the network upon which all of you folks have been binging. A couple of things to remind you of at the top of the show. First off, if you're not listening to the full network, including shows like Options Bootcamp, you are missing out. It will really get a lot of you out there who are, let's say, crypto native, maybe up to speed in all things options and derivatives. And of course, if you want to go above and beyond, you definitely want to join us for our pro Q&As and our options oddities, get the exclusive podcast feed, get, of course, live streams, the giveaways, all sorts of fun. theoptionsinsider.com/pro is the place to go. As we see who's joining us on the old crypto rundown today, I'm pleased to welcome back on our old pal. There's just so much going on, he had to come back. Mr. Greg Magadini, the director of derivatives over there at Amberdata. Mr. Greg, welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you so much, Mark. Yeah, definitely a ton going on. So very excited to be back on the show to talk about it.
Hey, you keep picking these boring weeks to come on the show. You know, we got to search for things to talk about, Greg. It's a heavy lift, but we'll see what we can do as we keep on rolling into the Bitcoin breakdown.
It's time to explore the latest trending activity, trends, and developments across the world's leading crypto market. It's time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Bitcoin Breakdown, the portion of the show where we do just that. We break down all the action in the world's leading digital asset. Yep, we're talking about the big dog, which is Bitcoin, looking a lot bigger, historically bigger now since our last show. We were at 97,255 on our show last week. Coming into this show, rocketing north of 100K. Then we didn't stop there, hit a new high right around 105, then said, you know what, why stop there? Let's hit 106. Even breaking past 107 briefly earlier this morning. So new all-time highs aplenty out there. As we were kicking off the show, back down to a paltry, a meager 106 and 43 listeners. So just massive rallies out there on the Bitcoin front. We have to start there, Mr. Greg. A lot going on. What is catching your eye out there in this just wild rally in Bitcoin, sir?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of narratives going on about sort of the fundamental picture of Bitcoin. So obviously, we have this trend of corporate treasuries adding Bitcoin to their balance sheet. I think Microsoft just voted on potentially doing that. It got denied. But one of the big news events that we've gotten in the past few days is that now Bitcoin is going to be treated like a regular mark-to-market asset as opposed to a long-term asset that gets depreciated in accounting terms. So this will be very interesting because now it's just a liquid asset like anything else. That's a kind of cash-like security like stocks or anything else like that where you can mark to market. So the thesis goes that more corporations are going to be adding it to their balance sheet. And then obviously we're getting more chit chat about strategic Bitcoin reserves from a government level. We've actually seen even Japan talk about that recently. And so those are kind of the fundamental backdrops around what's happening in terms of price action. And then in terms of sort of the vol, this move today, which is also closely associated with MicroStrategy being added or approved to be added on the NASDAQ 100. I think those shares start becoming traded together on the 23rd of December. Well, that's created a narrative to move up Bitcoin, flatten up the term structure. So a few days ago, short-term vol was as low as around 35, and now the front end of the term structure is completely flat. So we're around kind of a 55 to 60 implied vol landscape for Bitcoin right now. And so obviously things are moving right now, and I think the options market is pricing in that this is not a one and done thing. We could keep moving for a little while here.
You brought up one of the hot debates right now, Greg, which is this notion of the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Sounds cool. Sounds very, very official. Of course, something like we have for petroleum out there. This is a bit of a contentious issue. Some folks, even Powell, coming out saying that's kind of ludicrous. A lot of people who are not maybe as knee deep into the crypto world saying, why do we need a strategic Bitcoin reserve? Bitcoin will never be a currency. It's threatening 100 vol. You can't have a currency that is that volatile. And then you have, folks like Trump coming out there beating that drum on the campaign trail. Some folks said he was maybe just kowtowing a bit to the crypto crowd, get a little bit of price support action, saying we're going to buy a whole bunch of it for a strategic Bitcoin reserve. But Greg, where do you fall on this? Do you see a necessity for a strategic Bitcoin reserve, or is this kind of just Trump speak on the campaign trail?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because at the end of the day, historically, gold has been the currency of the people, so to speak. And then we moved on to a fiat system backed by gold. And then with Bretton Woods, we actually ended the complete gold backing of fiat, and now we just have paper fiat. And so it's, if we think about the global debt level where we are today, it's kind of the end of the so-called debt super cycle. And, where do we go from here? And is going back to hard money a good idea? And if we do go back to hard money, at least in part, if not in full, what does that hard money look like? Do we just always go back to, what people call the pet rock of gold? I like gold. I don't think it's a pet rock, but, is gold always the solution? And if the world is actually going towards digital gold, well, then there's a huge first mover advantage if we can just print our own fiat and then buy some Bitcoin or some gold with that fiat and be the first to move into that landscape. There's an argument to be made there. And realistically, if the world wasn't super in debt the way that we are, maybe that discussion is not as important. But if we are super in debt, I do think, it could be a quote unquote way out or a way to make your paper currency hard money in some way. And I think, Japan is the perfect example. I wouldn't be surprised that they do it. One, because they're the most in debt, but two, because they have like a society that could pull it off. And I think for us in the US, we could also do it, but I think the path is maybe not as completely clear, but I think it could make sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question out there, listeners. Do we need a strategic Bitcoin reserve, listeners? What are your thoughts? Might be a fun question of the week for you folks out there. Maybe might be interesting. A lot of folks are up in arms on both sides of this. Is this kind of just talking up his supporters there, or is there more grist for the mill? Can Bitcoin really, is it a strategic asset these days? I'm curious. Obviously, the folks at Microsoft and some other big companies saying, no, we don't need this on our books right now. So a lot of back and forth on this, which it makes it interesting. Is there back and forth on the vol and skew side? Let's find out. Remember, listeners, if you want to kick the tires and light the fires for yourselves, only one place to go for all this data we're talking about here and a whole bunch more. We are literally just scratching the surface of what is available. It is only a roughly 1 hour show, listeners, at the end of the day. You want to see it all for yourselves. Amberdata.io, the place to go to kick the tires and light the fires. Remember, that graphical version, the GUI, completely free for you folks now. So you have no excuse if you want to go kick the tires on all this data. If you are even remotely curious, if you are hashtag crypto curious, you need to be heading over to amberdata.io. If you did that, you could see all this cool data like we're going to break down right now. Like what is going on the weekly vol front in Bitcoin. And it's been a couple of weeks in a row now. It's been kind of fascinating to see where if you just ran the weekly vol numbers and you looked at nothing else in the Bitcoin world, you just looked at this number, you would say, oh, absolutely nothing happened this week. It was a very quiet week out there because we are almost literally unchanged on the 7-day vol from this time a week ago. Last week, 54 3/4. This week, a whopping 54 1/2. Now, as I say all that, remember, keep all this in the context of we are coming into what is traditionally the seasonally quiet period for volatility across the board. Everyone thinks of it in equities, but most asset classes tend to be a little quieter from a vol perspective heading into the holidays. For obvious reasons, not much going up in the market. Folks are away, have other things on their brain than, let's say, Bitcoin volatility. So bear that in mind, what we're talking about here. But we'll see if we keep this unchanged theme going throughout the rest of the vol landscape here. Let's go out a little bit farther. Let's see what's cooking, let's say, 30 days from now, shall we? A more standardized volatility metric. On our last show, we were at 55.2. Coming into the start of the show today, a little bit frothier, a little bit juicier, 57.3. That's even more interesting when we keep that context in mind, that it is that seasonally quiet period where vol is supposed to be coming in. So a little bit juicier on the 30-day front. If we go all the way out a whopping 6 months, listeners, what are the hodlers up to into the wilds of next year? Let's find out. Last week on the show, 59.65 was the 6-month vol. This week, up exactly 2 points, 61.65. So getting a little bit frothier, a little bit juicier farther out on the term structure, which is also interesting. Mr. Greg, a lot to unpack here on the vol term structure. What is catching your eye this week, sir?
Yeah, I think the term structure is very interesting. So, given all the bullish narratives and the potential sort of reserve currency status that could really make Bitcoin jump, and what by jump I mean like literally jump risk, where there's no trading in between. Given that aside, like if we look at realized vol for say IBIT, really the realized vol for the past, call it 84 days or 189 days rolling window is about a 57. And so if I look at the term structure, if I look at the leaps or the 2-year leaps, the vol is really kind of 65 to 70 on the implied side, which is a pretty big premium over the range of realized vol. And then let's add in the factor that realized vol is high right now because we've just rallied so much and we've had such a big move. If I go back to, say, 2023, we had some realized vol periods of 35 in Bitcoin, and we had a sort of a structural decline in realized volatility. So if I was pretty sure the risk of a approval of Bitcoin reserve status wasn't going to happen, then I would say implied is definitely a sell here. Not only do I think implied is a premium over realized, but I also think realized has some mean reversion lower to do. So that's kind of my initial instinct. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of risk if we get some craziness in terms of global policy of governments adding Bitcoin to their balance sheet, especially big governments such as the US or Japan or some European governments or whatever. In that case, Bitcoin can go nuts pretty fast. So in my mind, the types of structures that are kind of interesting is, maybe do some structures that end up being sort of delta long, but Vega short for, call it 6 months to 12 months time period. And then in the 4 months time period, own some really, really wingy insurance in terms of some gamma cover in case something crazy happens. And so if you get a grind up, that's not the move you want. If you get like a rather grindy, steep move up, that's not the move you want. But if you get the jump risk, that is definitely the move you want. And your short-term gamma coverage will definitely pay off there. And then if you get something that's like controlled bullishness and vol comes down, that does very well. So I like that sort of barbell strategy where I'll take the risk in the fast move up, but winning in the jump up or controlled grind up situations.
Interesting stuff. Speaking of interesting, Mr. Greg, we thought who better to solve the question of do we need a strategic Bitcoin reserve or not than our audience. They are the ultimate arbiters at the end of the day of all of these contentious issues, Mr. Greg. So we put it out to them right now, a bit of a flash poll to the audience, if you will, Mr. Greg. And in the early voting, which way do you think our audience is going, Greg?
Early voting, I think they said yes.
You are right. 2/3 exactly coming down on yes, and a third coming down as no. It's only been live for like 2 minutes, so we'll see how it shakes out as the week unfolds, Mr. Greg. But right now, in the early voting, Greg and all of his cronies are in there saying yes. They're skewing the numbers.
Love it.
All right, listeners, get over there at Options and make your voice heard, along with our traditional question of the week. But let's get into some more vol and skew fun, shall we, listeners? What's going on from a skew perspective? Is it the same deal? If you ran these numbers right now, would you think really not a heck of a lot has transpired since our last show? And the answer is maybe, kind of. Let's look out on the 7-day skew and see what's going on the weekly front. Last week, we were slightly negative. Remember, if we're plus or minus a point really in either direction from around zero, it really, to me, is kind of meaningless. And that's where we were last week, negative 0.3. This week, going the other direction, positive 0.9, but still within that window of, especially for the weekly vol front, weekly skew front, I should say, really kind of a rounding error out there. Let's go a little bit farther out on the 30-day front. And again, looking very similar. 2.25 on the show last week, 2 3/4 this week. So slightly juicier to the upside, but you would never look at this and say, oh, we must have broken through new all-time highs multiple times over the course of the past week. Going out on the 6-month skew front, we're actually seeing that skew come in. We were at a positive 5.7 on the show last week, 4 1/4 this week. So a lot of skew juice coming off the top for the hodlers out there. Mr. Greg, what's catching your eye on the skew front in Bitcoin this week?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, long dated skew, it's biased to the call side, but it's not as crazy as we've seen it before. Just to contextualize for people, so if I'm looking at the 180-day 25 delta risk reversal, so that's a 25 delta call minus the 25 delta put on the 180-day DTEs. Right now it's at about, call it 5 points. But if we go back to Q4 2020, really when Bitcoin finally broke past that $20,000 high, multi-year high that it had before, skew traded 22 vol points above the puts. So 22 vol points to the calls over the puts. And that's for the 180 days where we could see something like the 30 DTE trading 57 points above the 25 delta put. So we've had vol moves that are very, very crazy in terms of skew. So where we are today is almost symmetric. Like it to me, there's no real skew being priced in here, but I think there's good reason. When we broke past 20,000 back in Q4 2020, we had the FOMO environment, but we didn't have the crypto vol infrastructure for market makers and vol sellers to essentially take the other side. With IBIT, it's a different environment. People who have market making infrastructure, who have balance sheets to warehouse a very large call skew through covered calls or whatever strategy they like to do, or institutions who buy IBIT and sell covered calls against it for yields. I suspect that it would be very unlikely that we get back to that crazy, crazy call skew. And if we do get back to it, like Q4 2020, that's going to be like the one and done only opportunity to really sell it. because I think people will be dying to sell that. If you're a pension fund and you just put Bitcoin on your balance sheet because you want a diversification of the asset class to your entire portfolio and you just don't really care about Bitcoin, yeah, you want to sell the covered call against it for income. And if you get called out, you get called out. There's a lot of people out there. So there's a lot of people willing to sell that. So I don't think we'll get that crazy skew again. So I think where we are today makes a lot of sense.
Let's see if we can make some sense of some of the other products you folks are slinging Bitcoin in right now. And Greg, it's funny. I've been talking to a lot of people since IBIT, the options launch. A lot of people who were, let's say, crypto reluctant, some who had famously washed their hands of their crypto holdings, had divested of all of it. They've all been lured back to the dark side of crypto with the launch of IBIT options. Have you been seeing that as well, Greg? It's just luring everybody back.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was very interesting to see IBIT performance not only be 50% of Darebit volume on day one, but IBIT in terms of the largest option volume in the entire equity space is top 12, out of 5,000 stocks. So says something.
Yeah, it's outpacing a lot of other iShares products out there in terms of AUM. It beat gold a while ago. So yeah, it's been an active one, and it's active again this week, listeners. 60.35 when we kicked off the show, up nearly 5 handles from where it was this time a week ago. It's got a short history, obviously, but setting new 52-week highs and new all-time highs pretty much all the time. So up nearly $5. That's what is expected after all when we are hitting new all-time highs out there in Bitcoin as well. And in terms of action, Greg, these new all-time highs, I was saying before, we didn't see it reflected in the skew or the vol necessarily out there in Bitcoin, but we are seeing it reflected in the volume here in IBIT. Just a banger day. Again, we're talking VIX kind of numbers here for this kind of volume. 469,000 contracts on the tape. In fact, when I was talking about VIX on our previous show just an hour and change ago, VIX wasn't at that level. Now, VIX has kicked in a little bit more. It's up to 679. So you're talking only a couple 100,000 contract difference now between IBIT and VIX, which you can see why folks are getting lured back to the dark side of IBIT. Even if you're not that into Bitcoin, the volume and the volatility is here, listeners. The ADV, 309,000, actually moving down 12,000 this week. I got a feeling it's going to be going back up after this. If you're wondering what is the vol out here in IBIT, it is at a 60, literally unchanged from what we were looking at this time last week. And the size open position still the same, those 54 puts and calls, kind of some synthetics that traded right as the options were open. That is still kind of dominating the tape. If you want to get beyond that, you have to go up to about 36,000 of the Jan 57 calls, which again looked optimistic just a week ago. Now they are in the money calls as well, as we're hanging out north of a 30. Greg, just volume for days out here in IBIT options. What is catching your eye, sir?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously the volume's there. I think another positioning gauge is to look at open interest in the Delta One products, talking about CME futures, talking about the perps on, say, Binance and OKX and Bybit and Darebit and things like that. And then lastly, looking at the cost of funding and the futures basis in those products. So right now, basis, call it 16. This has only been passed since January 2022. The only times that we've had higher basis were briefly around the spot ETF approval, where basis hit a high of 20. And then in April, when we made new all-time highs for the first time, where basis hit 22. Otherwise, basis is really hanging out around the 5 to 6% level. So where we are today is pretty extended, or it's getting extended in terms of funding and futures basis in those products. So that's something to keep in mind. I think the story around Ethereum, and we'll come back to that, and basis is very interesting. But if we look at total open interest, one of the big stories is that, for the longest time, Binance was the open interest mecca of futures and perps for Bitcoin. And today, the mecca is CME. And so that's a very interesting story for sort of the demand and the institutional demand for this Bitcoin move. And obviously the flows into IBIT and the volume for IBIT back that story up as well.
Yeah, a lot of flows going up out here in IBIT, listeners. If you're wondering what the big trades are today, almost 20,000, 19,000 of the 62 calls expiring this week. So all of it going up here in the weeklies. Let's just see really quickly. What do those go up for? They went for 82 cents up to about $1, listeners. So are you a buyer of a weekly call? I mean, they're not quite as far out of the money as they were. Obviously, they have rallied quite a bit. So 62s. Now about $1.50, as right about 60.5 now. At about $1.50 out of the money by the end of the week. Can IBIT get there? Seems like the sky is the limit for this product, followed by number 2, 17,000 of the 58 halves also expiring this week. Now we are opening definitely on the 62s. 58 halves, maybe there's a little bit of roll in action there, and then if that's not enough for you, how about the 60s going up 17,000 times today as well? And now in the money strike as well. And how about let's get optimistic. Let's go up to about 13,000 of the 63s going up today, also opening, and also about 13,000 of the 65. So maybe it looks like some vertical action going up out here, listeners. So IBIT lighten up the tape out here today. Listen, let's keep rolling, see what other products, see if every big Bitcoin name is feeling that rising tide, lifting all boats. A lot of people have been looking at BITO of late. Obviously, with IBIT taking up all the oxygen in the room, the question is, what's going to happen to BITO? Well, BITO rallying hard since our last show as well. 27.30 when we kicked off the show, up $2.30. The ADV, though, taking a hit this week, 137,000 contracts a day. That sounds like a lot because it is, but it's down 66,000 from our last show. So maybe some of those people starting to think maybe all that IBIT volume has to come from somewhere. Maybe it is new players, obviously, but also maybe coming from a little bit of cannibalization of BITO as well. 102,000 contracts on the day today, so maybe they'll get to their ADV, but maybe not much beyond that. The vol at a 59, so almost exactly up 1 point, almost exactly identical to the 30-day vol in IBIT, which is a 60. So yeah, if you were looking for maybe the writing on the wall for BITO, volume-wise, not a good sign, down 66,000 contracts. But again, we are in that seasonally quiet period, so I'd be cautious about reading too much into that. But Greg, what are your thoughts? You think they're starting to come for BITO as the writing on the wall, sir?
I think BITO is an interesting product. I hope the writing is not on the wall. Again, BITO is a great way to use equities to get exposure to that CME basis. And then obviously BitX, my favorite product, which is a 2x BITO, has 2 times that exposure. So again, I think there's a place for trading the basis product, and then there's a place for sort of the cash product such as IBIT. Just like the crypto complex has a lot of spot trading, but it has a lot of perps and futures trading. And getting access to that stream of funding or the implied funding is really, really interesting. The BITO wrinkle is that huge dividend that's a little bit harder to deal with and model out. But the basis part of it is really interesting. And obviously, I mentioned here a lot of times, but I like the idea of selling my covered call on BITO and owning the IBIT as the underlying. Obviously, there's some margin stuff there, but there's interesting things to be done there. And obviously, the basis is an interesting product to trade.
Speaking of interesting products to trade, Greg, I don't know if they get much more interesting and or terrifying than your favorite. I've called it the product for crypto and options degenerates. This is MSTU. Strap in for this one, listeners. We got some stuff to talk about here with MSTU. Trading right now, as we kicked off the show, a whopping $17.25. Now, if you're saying to yourself, wait a minute, wasn't it trading in the 140s on the show last week? The answer was yes. We are down about exactly $123 from where we were this time a week ago. Greg, we were joking about someone selling some puts for about $18 on the show last week. You said I might want to buy those. This is just mad. This is why I said, listeners, if you're just dipping your toes in the crypto derivatives markets, do not, for the love of God, do not start in MSTU. This product is not for the faint of heart. It's averaging 11,000 contracts a day, which is up 1,000 on the week, but that doesn't even sniff what is going on out there today, listeners. 92,000 contracts going up today in MSTU, listeners. The big dog today, listeners, 6,240 of the D's 20s. These are now, with stock has sold off since we started the show, down to $16.50. This thing is like holding grains of sand in your fingers. They just keep slipping through. This thing is getting annihilated. But nearly over 6,000 of the D's 20s have traded this week, listeners, for prices starting at $1 and down to 60 cents. Let's hope for their sake they're selling these things. Looks like they might have been buying them, or unless they were trying to crush the bid all the way down. But wow. And then the 18.6 calls as well. That's a great strike. 4,500 of those bad boys. This is all opening paper, by the way, listeners, including a big block of 4,263 going up, lifting the offer for $1.30. So it seems like folks were trying to scoop the low, what they thought was the low when the stock was 18.30 a couple hours ago. Guess what? It's below 17 now, so you're wearing it on these calls as well. Greg, this is just madness. I've said it before. This is the product for crypto degenerates. I'm sure we have a lot of confused listeners right now as to what the hell is going on in MSTU. So let's start there, Greg. You love this product. You're the one who brought it to this show. You're the one who infected our show with this product. What the heck is going on in MSTU, sir?
Yes, the ultimate degen product. So yeah, obviously over the weekend we had a stock split, 10-1. And then over the weekend, or on Friday going into the weekend, we had the MSTR, which MSTU is the 2 times MSTR. We had the approval of MicroStrategy being added to the NASDAQ 100. So that sent the product up a little bit on that news. And now we're in a situation where theoretically it gets added to the NASDAQ 100 on the 23rd of December. But we just, are we in a sell the news moment? I think that's kind of my thesis here. We had the news event for MicroStrategy. And even if spot is not a sell the news event, I do think vol probably is. I think this was a big vol catalyst for MicroStrategy. MicroStrategy vol is absolutely insane, which times that by 2 for your MSTU vol. But if I just pull this up real quick, if I look at the realized volatility for the past 4 years, the upper 75th percentile, which is where we are today for most measurements, call it 21 days, 84 days, 189 days, is at about 110. So that today we're at about 110 realized vol. And then sort of the median is about, call it 75 to 80. So I think, if we have a little bit of a sell the news event in terms of realized vol, I think we could see realized vol come down. If we look at the implied vol term structure for MicroStrategy, I like MicroStrategy for just the initial vol analysis because it's very liquid. But if we look at, say, the term structure, we have a little bit of a backwardation term structure. So, we're kind of peaking out at the 60 DTE implied at about 125 vol. And right now, 110 vol is the realized, and the realized is a little bit high. And now we just got the catalyst for the, vol reversion a little bit. So I think that's kind of interesting. So that makes MSTU an interesting way to play that, because obviously there's 2 times vol exposure there. And then in terms of price, I mean, it's a little bit of a tough play because there's every reason for price to finally kind of come down on MicroStrategy and MSTU, because we have 300% net asset value premium in the equity. We have the company itself selling equity to raise capital to buy Bitcoin. But really, it's one of those things where the market is pretty enthusiastic around Bitcoin and therefore around MicroStrategy and so on and so forth. So it's a little bit of a battle, but I think the vol peak is behind us for the near term to medium term when talking about MicroStrategy.
So that's not you coming in and gobbling up the D's 1860s for this week, Greg, paying $1.30 for those bad boys, or up to $1.60. Some of those, my goodness, wow, this thing is just a beast. And by the way, I'm glad we discussed that, because I could just see the letters and emails coming in, Greg. Because one of my pet peeves is when there's a big stock split and they don't adjust their charts to reflect that. I'm looking at some of the, while you were talking, I was looking at some of the major outlets out there that some of our casual listeners might use, like a Yahoo Finance and a Google. And of course, they just show the stock just falling out of bed, right? they show it going from 163 on Friday to $17. And so I just knew the emails and questions were going to come in. What the hell is going on? So a good time to address that here on the show. Listen, yes, obviously there was, whenever you see stuff like this, chances are it's not just, well, obviously stocks can get annihilated, but usually dig into the weeds a little bit. You will find the specifics. You can also, if you are curious, listeners, anything that has listed options on it, it's going to be cleared by the OCC. So if you're confused by something like this, take the ticker and go over to the Options Clearing Corp, just OCC, and type in the ticker in their search bar, and there usually will be a circular explaining all of this. So it'll say, hey, here's what's going on. The stock has been adjusted 10-for-1 split. Here's what's going on with your options position. So if you are ever uncertain what's going on with one of your underlyings, you see a big move like this, chances are there's some sort of corporate action maybe you're missing, and you can go check it out for yourselves. Just type the ticker over there at the OCC, and they will usually set you straight. Let's get out of here on Mara really quickly. I don't think anything can really hold a candle to MSTU, listeners, so we'll burn through Mara really quickly. 24.5 right now, up about $0.50. The ADV sub 500, so sub 500,000 for the first time in a while. Still a lot of paper. My goodness. Mara also threatening VIX, even though that's down 44,000 this week as well. Today looks like they're threatening it. 417,000 contracts on the tape. The big dog today, by the way, in Mara, 23,000 of the 25 calls expiring this week. Only $0.50 out of the money, so clearly rolling the bones there. And the D26 is also expiring this week. 19, almost 20,000 of those also opening there. So some opening upside paper in Mara. The vol right now, 115, up a whopping 35 points. So Mara looking juicy. Also looking frothy from a vol perspective, as was IBIT out there. And MSTU just looking completely insane. So again, not for the faint of heart, listeners, as we keep on rolling to explore the altcoin universe.
It's time to move beyond Bitcoin and find out what's moving the rest of the crypto marketplace. It's time to boldly venture into the altcoin universe.
All right, listeners, let's get into it. Usually, this is where the madness is on the show, but MSTU stealing a lot of thunder this week. Usually, the bottom half of our top 10 in the altcoin universe is where the madness is. And, it's still pretty wild out here this week. We are pretty much treading water on the overall level to break into the top 10, maybe up slightly. Last week we had Tron at about 25.3 billion. This week, Tron managing to hold on to the number 10 spot yet again. So kicking all the others to the curb at about 25.5 billion worth of market cap. So up slightly on the week. Number 9, we got Cardano, 38.6 billion. Number 8, USD Coin, 42.5 billion. Number 7, it is Doge. 59.5 billion worth of market cap. Number 6, BNB, 104.5 billion. Number 5, our old pal Solana, 104.6 billion. Number 4, XRP, 140.8 billion. Number 3, it's Tether, 140. This is interesting. This is actually showing XRP should be above it. So this chart's a little wonky, listeners. So we have a kind of a close tie, right around 140 billion each for Tether and XRP, kind of fighting back and forth the number 3 and 4 spot. Number 2, you know what it is. It's ETH, 486.9 billion. And the big dog, Bitcoin, new highs mean new levels as well. Over 2 trillion in market cap now. Just a tick under 2.1 trillion, 2.099 trillion worth of market cap in Bitcoin. My goodness, listeners. But one of the other narratives we've been talking about on the show, not just that MSTU is for complete degenerates, but also, what's up with Bitcoin? Excuse me. What's up with ETH? Why can't it keep pace with everything else? We have seen a little bit of a resurgence over the last few weeks. Seems like the ETH heads are getting that memo, trying to play a little bit of catch up. Did it do it this week? Well, ETH back north of 4,000, so not quite at a new all-time high like Bitcoin, but starting to get reminiscent of some of those levels we saw not that long ago, a few years in the rearview mirror, 44, 4,500. 4,046 was where we were at the start of the show. Puts us up 220 handles from the 38.26 level we were at a week ago. Mr. Greg, what's catching your eye in the world of ETH, sir?
Yeah, so one of the things that I recently read about and saw in ETH is that a lot of the open interest, the COT report is showing traders net short futures in Ethereum, and there's a large futures short. And I think one of the things that's very interesting is ETH is a yielding asset. Bitcoin is not a yielding asset. The ETH futures basis is at around 16%, similar to Bitcoin, but typically yielding assets, the futures term structure would be more of a backwardation as opposed to a contango, because it's meant to mimic that synthetic yield. And so the way that the futures term structure is right now in Ethereum, theoretically, you can buy Ethereum and stake Ethereum, earn your 5% staking yield, and then go to the futures market and sell short the future and earn another 16%. And so I think the futures term structure in Ethereum is having a moment of reflection and rebalance. I think the true catalyst for this to send the term structure into backwardation and essentially crush the term structure for ETH, we need to see the ETFs, the spot ETF for Ethereum, start accruing staking yield. The second that happens, investors will be able to buy the spot Ethereum ETF, earn the yield through the ETF, use the ETF as collateral to short the CME future, and then I think we see convergence in that spread. And so what I would expect is futures yields go from positive 16% to negative 6% ish, or at least a big drop, maybe not negative 6%, but a 6% discount to the Bitcoin one at least. And so I think this is what some early traders are starting to price. So that's pretty interesting. Overall, ETH has been a big laggard for some of the fundamental reasons we talked about in the past few episodes about L2s and transactions being done off L1, off chain, which is reducing the burn mechanism, in ETH, which flips ETH supply from decreasing to inflationary and increasing, so on and so forth. So these are kind of the dynamics that are pretty interesting. For regular traders, how do I take advantage of that? Again, these products like ETHU, which is a 2 times ETH ETF that's built on top of the CME futures. It's got a lot of exposure to that basis, has a lot of exposure to the ETF 2x performance drag, things like that. So, and obviously the higher vol in ETH, which the ETH term structure is about 10 points premium to the Bitcoin term structure. So that's another interesting aspect.
I like that. Would you say rest and relaxation for ETH? Was that your terminology? I like that. But, rest and reflection, I think, is what you said. But it makes some sense given what we're seeing out here. You mentioned the term structure. Let's go explore it ourselves, listeners. We're kind of coming up against it. We already talked a lot about MSTU and all that madness, and Bitcoin, of course. So let's combine the skew and the vol here. Let's go out on the vol front first. 70.5 on the weekly vol a week ago. This week, 72 3/4. So getting a little bit frothier. Let's go out on the 30-day vol front. We were at 70 1/4 this time a week ago, 69.5. So coming in roughly half a point. And going out 6 months, listeners, 69.7 on the show last week, 72.65. So get a wee bit frothier here. Maybe it's that 4,000 level. Makes the ETH folks kind of stroke their chin and say, On the skew front, listeners, not a heck of a lot going on the weekly front. We were negative 1.5 on the show last week, negative 1.5 today. So re-rack and wait for another week, I suppose. Going out 30 days, 1.3 to the upside last week, positive 2 this week. And going out a whopping 6 months, 5 3/4 on the ETH front a week ago. This week, 4 1/4. So coming in about 1.5 points. Greg, you kind of just mentioned the term structure in ETH. Anything else catching your eye from a vol or skew perspective right now in the number 2 crypto asset, sir?
I think the main aspect that I think is kind of interesting here in terms of the term structure is obviously, since we're at a premium to Bitcoin, the market is reflecting that, if ETH has a smaller market cap, ETH has a higher realized vol historically. Should we get the altcoin rotation? I think that 10 vol point premium is more than justified in terms of relative vol. But in terms of implied versus realized, the same sort of dynamics exist for ETH as they exist for Bitcoin, which basically, we're trading at a pretty large premium to realized. And I definitely think that the trend of lower structural vol is as true for ETH as it is for Bitcoin. So keep that in mind.
We will keep that in mind as we roll through some of the other altcoin for this week, listeners. Solana, obviously a rival, a contender for the ETH crown. Looking a little bit lighter this week, 223 1/4 last week, 218.84 this week, down almost 4.5 handles on the week. XRP, 242 last week, 247. So it looks like it's back in that kind of treading water range that it was in for years. Is 2.5 roughly the next level we're going to be stuck at in XRP for a while? We're going to give it up, or are we going to rally ho? Right now, lately, we've been hanging out back at this level after hitting higher levels and retreating. Dogecoin, 43.4 cents last week, 40.4 cents, so down about 3 cents. Litecoin, 122.40 last week, 120.16, down about 2.25. This week, Cardano literally, well, I guess a penny, almost literally unched. 111 last week, 110 today, so not much cooking there. Polkadot, 955 last week, 892 this week, down 63 cents. And Greg's favorite, his largest crypto holding, Shiba Inu. It was 297 last week, this week, 274. So coming in a wee bit. Unfortunately, no crypto Lambos for Mr. Greg this week. Mr. Greg, before we roll on out of here for the show, any other altcoin lighting up your tape or your wallet this week, sir?
I think the last kind of play, which I've talked about it a lot, which is the spec play of, does Dogecoin get added to X as a payments rail? I think that's always kind of a play out there. And then in terms of different altcoins, there's a lot of restaking coins for Ethereum. Eigenlayer is a protocol that's helped do that. So if you're kind of an ETH hodler, there's a lot of ways for you to earn staking rewards without going through the staking process. I think those are interesting avenues to look into. And so, yeah, I would take a look at all that stuff.
All right, everybody, that music means we've come to the end of another wild journey through the world of crypto. We talked, obviously, Bitcoin, new all-time highs. Do we need a strategic Bitcoin reserve? The madness of MSTU, the just confounding, sometimes madness and just frustration that is ETH, and a whole bunch of other fun stuff. Greg, as we're winding down the show here, I just checked in once again with our audience. We are now at 57.1% of listeners say yes, and 42.9% saying no. So it is a pretty contentious issue, even with our audience, Greg. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I understand the arguments on both sides, and it's one of those things where, if Bitcoin is here to stay, getting a strategic reserve seems like the smartest move in the entire world. If Bitcoin is a fad and it's 2000 internet bubble status, and then we bought a Bitcoin reserve and the thing goes to zero, it looks pretty foolish. So it's definitely a binary outcome, and I can understand the arguments on both sides.
So folks have very heated viewpoints. Why don't you go ahead and give them your personal cell phone number, Greg, so they can contact you at 2 a.m. and share their thoughts about a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And while you're at that, Mr. Greg, where should folks go if they want to check out more of the cool tools you guys have to offer over there at Amberdata? Yeah, absolutely. So as Mark mentioned earlier, the GUI, completely free for all you listeners. You can look at Deribit charts. You can look at MicroStrategy, vol surfaces, IBIT, order flow, things like that. Please go to pro.amberdata.io. Sign up with an email, and you'll have full access to the platform. You can modify it, save your dashboard, so on and so forth. If you want some more analysis from our end, you can go to amberdataderivatives.substack.com. And lastly, if you want to visit our website, amberdata.io, if you're an institution looking for API access to all the underlying data, you can get in touch with us, and one of our salespeople will reach out to you guys. There you go, listeners. If you're listening to this show, that must mean you're curious about that stuff. Now with the GUI going free, you have literally no reason not to kick the tires and light the fires. Begin your journey over there, amberdata.io, the place to go to learn more. We have to get on out of here, listeners. Back again tomorrow for all you pro folks rolling out the crypto hot seat. Who's going to join us? Well, I guess you have to find out over there. TheOptionsInsider.com/pro is the place to go to learn more. Then we're back again with our usual array of content throughout the week. Options Bootcamp, the option block, volatility views, all sorts of fun. Until we're back again next Monday, another episode of the Crypto Rundown. Stay safe out there, everybody.
The Crypto Rundown is brought to you by Amberdata. If you're entering the digital asset class, you'll need access to granular on-chain and market data from multiple venues to power research, trading, risk management, and compliance. Amberdata delivers comprehensive data and insights into blockchain networks, crypto markets, and decentralized finance, empowering financial institutions to apply traditional finance methods to digital assets. Amberdata eliminates the infrastructure setup, integration challenges, and maintenance headaches to access digital asset data, reducing cost and time to market to enter the digital asset class. Learn more and download their digital asset data guide at www.amberdata.io. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.